In the amber glow of Lumen Restaurant, where crystal chandeliers cast fractured light across white linen tables, they laughed. They laughed when Archie Coleman walked through the revolving door, rain still dripping from his work jacket, carrying a modest bouquet of wildflowers wrapped in yesterday's newspaper. They laughed harder when he approached a table by the window where a woman sat in a sleek carbon fiber wheelchair, her platinum blonde hair catching the light like spun glass. The whispers started immediately. He's looking for pity. She's too good for him. This won't last, through appetizers. But when the glass reflected the towering Sterling Dynamics logo across the street, the woman lifted her head with eyes that held the calm of deep water and the bearing of someone who'd commanded boardrooms. She was Alexandra Sterling, the CEO who'd vanished 6 months ago after a mysterious accident and just returned to reclaim her throne. That night, the laughter died. Then it turned to fear. Seattle wore its autumn rain like a second skin. The city pulsed with the rhythm of commerce and ambition. Neon signs bleeding color onto slick pavement. The Space Needle rising through low clouds like a promise or a warning. At the heart of the tech district stood Sterling Dynamics Tower, 47 stories of steel and glass, home to innovations in robotics and human augmentation technology. In the basement levels, where delivery trucks rumbled and security cameras blinked their red eyes, Archie Coleman worked the overnight shift. He was 36, built lean from years of climbing catwalks and crawling through mechanical spaces, his hands marked with the small scars that came from honest work. Electrical systems, HVAC, emergency generators. If it kept the building breathing, Archie maintained it. He wore his blue work uniform with quiet dignity, kept a multi-tool in his left pocket, and a photo of his daughter in his right. Louisa was 7 years old, gap-toothed and brilliant, with a mind that asked why about everything and wouldn't settle for simple answers. She was the reason he took double shifts, the reason he'd left engineering school when his wife walked out the day after the delivery room, unable or unwilling to handle the weight of motherhood. Louisa didn't know that story. She knew her father was the man who fixed broken things, who taught her to solder circuit boards at the kitchen table, who promised her the world could be understood if you just looked close enough. Alexandra Sterling was 34 and beautiful in the way that commands attention without asking for it. Her platinum hair fell in waves past her shoulders. Before the accident, she'd walked through corporate corridors in Louboutin heels that clicked like punctuation marks. Now she moved in a wheelchair that cost more than most cars, custom-built carbon fiber with intelligent suspension and whisper-quiet motors. The accident had stolen the use of her legs but not her authority. She'd returned to Sterling Dynamics 3 weeks ago with a prototype exoskeleton strapped beneath her clothing, taking slow, calculated steps in private, while the board members circled like sharks, sensing blood in the water. The accident itself remained a blur. She remembered rain, headlights, the smell of burning rubber, a black SUV coming from nowhere. Then darkness. The police report called it a single-vehicle incident. Her Tesla swerving off the road near the Harbor District at 11:43 p.m. No witnesses. Camera footage mysteriously corrupted for that 30-second window. She'd woken in the hospital with shattered vertebrae and a memory that ended and restarted like a film with missing frames. Something was wrong with the official story. She felt it in her bones, the ones that still had feeling. In the shadows of the executive suite, Wilfred Langley moved with the patience of a spider. 45 years old, silver-haired, always impeccably dressed in suits that cost what Archie made in 2 months. He'd been with Sterling Dynamics since the beginning, back when Alexandra's father had built the company from a garage startup. Now he sat on the board of directors and chaired the finance committee, and he had plans, big plans, plans that required Alexandra Sterling to be seen as weak, uncertain, unable to lead. He'd already begun whispering to other board members, questioning her judgment, suggesting that a CEO who couldn't walk couldn't possibly navigate the company through its most challenging quarter. He had a phrase he liked to use in private meetings: profit over pity. It was his philosophy. It was about to become his epitaph. Finn Monroe stood 6 feet 2 inches of coiled watchfulness. 38. Former military police. Head of internal security for Sterling Dynamics. He saw everything. Logged everything. trusted almost nothing. He owed Archie Coleman his life. Though few people knew it. 2 years ago, during a power surge that should have been routine, Archie had tackled Finn away from a transformer seconds before it exploded. Finn had walked away with singed eyebrows and a debt he intended to repay. When he saw Archie's name on the restaurant reservation list that Alexandra's assistant had accidentally copied to the security brief, Finn's instincts began to hum. Nothing in this building happened by accident. The stage was set. The players were in motion. And at Lumen Restaurant, under lights that flickered like truth trying to break through, a blind date was about to become something far more dangerous. Archie arrived 17 minutes late, straight from fixing a pump failure in sublevel 3. His jacket held the faint smell of machine oil and rain. The maitre d' looked at him with the polite contempt reserved for people who didn't belong. But Archie had learned long ago not to apologize for working with his hands. He'd cleaned up in the bathroom, scrubbed his nails, changed into a clean shirt he kept in his locker. The wildflowers were an impulse buy from a street vendor, tied with twine, honestly imperfect. Alexandra had arrived punctually, as she did to everything. She'd chosen the table herself when making the reservation through a blind date app she'd joined on a whim during a sleepless night. The table sat beside floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a reflection of the street behind her. A habit from years of executive paranoia. Always see the exits. Always know who's approaching. The wheelchair didn't change that instinct. It sharpened it. When Archie approached, the nearby tables fell silent in the way people do when watching something they expect to be entertaining in its awkwardness. A single dad and a disabled woman. How touching. How tragic. How temporary. Archie pulled out the chair across from her and sat down without fanfare. He placed the wildflowers on the table between them. "I'm Archie," he said simply. "I'm late because a pump decided to die at the worst possible time. I'm a single dad to a 7-year-old who's smarter than I'll ever be. I work with my hands because I like fixing things that are broken. I don't make a lot of money, and I don't pretend to. If that's a problem, I'll finish my water and we can part as friends." Alexandra studied him with eyes that had evaluated merger proposals and hostile takeovers. What she saw was something rare. Honesty without performance. Strength without posturing. "I'm Alex," she said, using the name she gave when she wanted to be seen as human instead of corporate. "I'm temporarily out of work, recovering from an accident. I'm about to go back to a project that helps people move when their bodies won't cooperate. I don't believe in pretending to be something I'm not. I think we'll get along fine." The conversation flowed with surprising ease. Archie talked about Louisa's obsession with building model vehicles, how she'd taught herself to wire LED lights into a cardboard Mars rover. Alexandra talked about the exoskeleton technology her company was developing, how it could give people their mobility back, how it wasn't charity but engineering. Neither mentioned money. Neither tried to impress the other with credentials or connections. They talked like two people who'd forgotten how to talk to anyone without armor. Then the lights flickered. It started with the chandelier above the bar, a stuttering dimness that made the bartender look up with concern. Archie's head turned immediately toward the ceiling, his eyes tracking the wiring path from fixture to fixture. The kitchen lights browned out. Someone gasped. The maitre d' rushed toward the back, already reaching for his phone. Archie stood without asking permission and walked straight to the service panel near the kitchen entrance. A waiter tried to stop him. Archie showed the multi-tool from his pocket like identification and said 3 words. He opened the panel, scanned the circuit breakers with the focused intensity of someone reading a language only he understood, found the loose neutral connection on the 40-amp feed, tightened it with 2 efficient turns, and restored full power before the emergency lighting kicked in. The head chef emerged from the kitchen with relief written across his face. "You just saved us from dumping $800 worth of food." "Thank you." He shook Archie's hand with genuine gratitude, the kind that crossed class boundaries. Archie returned to the table. The neighboring conversations had stopped entirely. The people who'd been laughing were now quiet, embarrassed, confronted with their own assumptions. Alexandra was smiling, a real smile that reached her eyes and stayed there. "That was impressive," she said. "That was Tuesday," Archie replied. "Most of life is just showing up and fixing what's broken." She wanted to tell him then, wanted to say she was the CEO of Sterling Dynamics, that she wasn't temporarily out of work but temporarily unable to walk into her own building without people questioning whether she belonged there. But something held her back. This moment was too honest. Too clean. She wanted one night where someone looked at her and saw Alex, not Alexandra Sterling, not the disabled executive, not the vulnerable target, just someone worth talking to. They finished dinner slowly, letting the hours unspool like thread from a spool. The restaurant emptied around them. The rain picked up outside, drumming against glass, turning the city into a watercolor painting of light and shadow. When they finally left, Archie insisted on walking Alexandra to her car. The parking garage was dimly lit, sloping downward in concrete spirals. Halfway down the ramp, Alexandra's wheelchair stuttered. The electronic brake system locked up, freezing her in place on a 3-degree incline. She tried the override. Nothing. The battery indicator showed full charge, but the motor refused to respond. Archie moved behind the chair without being asked, checked the angle, and positioned himself to prevent any backward roll. "It's okay," he said quietly. "I've got you." He examined the wheel assembly, found the emergency manual release, and disengaged the brake. Then he noticed the logo embedded in the chair's carbon fiber frame, Sterling Dynamics. The pieces clicked together just as a black sedan pulled up, and a man in a dark suit stepped out. Finn Monroe moved with military precision, his eyes sweeping the garage for threats before focusing on Archie with an intensity that could cut glass. "Miss Sterling," Finn said formally. "The car is ready." The air crystallized. Archie looked from the security chief to the woman in the wheelchair. Alexandra Sterling. Not Alex, who was temporarily out of work. Alexandra Sterling, CEO of the tower where he tightened bolts and replaced filters and worked the overnight shift in the basement. The people who'd laughed at them were heading to their own cars now. When they recognized Alexandra, when they realized who she was, their laughter turned to shuffling feet and averted eyes. Shame came late, but it came. Alexandra looked at Archie with an expression that mixed apology and something else. Hope. Maybe. Or fear that this honest thing they'd found would shatter against the reality of who they were in the world outside this garage. "Thank you," she said, "for seeing me as a person first." Archie nodded slowly. The shock was settling into something more complex. "Did you know?" he asked. "That I work for you?" "Not until 5 minutes ago," she answered. "The app doesn't show employment details." There was a long pause filled with rain sounds and the distant hum of garage ventilation. Then Alexandra did something that would change everything. "Come by the tower tomorrow," she said. "I'd like to properly thank you. Executive floor, 3 p.m. It wasn't a request from a CEO to an employee. It was an invitation from someone who'd found something rare and didn't want to let it disappear. "I'll be there," Archie said. Finn opened the car door. Alexandra transferred from chair to seat with practiced efficiency, the kind that came from months of physical therapy and stubborn determination. The wheelchair folded automatically, and Finn loaded it into the trunk. As the car pulled away, Archie stood in the garage, rain beginning to leak through the ceiling cracks, and wondered if he'd just stumbled into something wonderful, or something that would cost him more than he could afford to pay. He didn't notice the camera mounted in the corner of the garage, the one that fed directly to the executive security network. He didn't see Wilfred Langley reviewing the footage from his home office, replaying the moment Alexandra smiled at the maintenance man, seeing not a romance but a vulnerability. A pressure point. A weakness to exploit. The wheels were already turning. The Sterling Dynamics boardroom occupied the 43rd floor, a glass-walled chamber that overlooked the city like a watchtower. Wilfred Langley sat at his usual position, fingers steepled, watching the quarterly reports flash across the screen with the expression of a man executing a long-prepared plan. Henry Blake, the chief financial officer, presented the numbers with the enthusiasm of someone reading a eulogy. Revenue down 12%, project delays in 3 departments. Investor confidence wavering, all of it traceable to the 6-month gap when Alexandra had been in the hospital and recovery. The company had survived, but survival wasn't growth. "The board needs to consider restructuring," Wilfred said smoothly. "Not because we doubt Miss Sterling's abilities, but because the market demands decisive action." We have an opportunity to divest the robotics assistance division. The R&D costs are astronomical. And frankly, it's a vanity project that doesn't align with our core profitability metrics. Alexandra sat at the head of the table, her exoskeleton hidden beneath her tailored suit, her posture perfect despite the fatigue it cost her. The robotics assistance division is the future of this company, she said calmly. It's also the difference between being a tech company and being a human company. We don't abandon projects because they're difficult. We abandon projects when they're financial liabilities, Wilfred countered. With all due respect, Miss Sterling, personal investment in a product doesn't make it viable. The implication hung in the air like smoke. Personal investment. The exoskeleton she was secretly testing. The technology that might give her back the ability to walk. He was painting her as compromised, unable to make objective decisions. Henry shifted uncomfortably. He was a good man caught in a bad situation, a numbers person who wanted clear answers in a world that dealt in ambiguities. The metrics suggest we need better leadership in cost management. Alexandra interrupted, her voice sharp as surgical steel, which is why I'm implementing a full internal audit of all contracts and vendor relationships over the past year. Starting with facilities management and building operations. Wilfred's expression didn't change, but something flickered behind his eyes. The audit would uncover things, irregularities, payments to shell companies. The careful architecture of his plan required darkness, and Alexandra was proposing to turn on all the lights. After the meeting, Bridget Hayes found evidence of unauthorized access to Alexandra's calendar. Someone had been tracking her movements, knowing when she'd be vulnerable, when she'd be alone. Finn tightened security protocols, but the logs had been scrubbed with professional skill. They were dealing with someone who understood systems. Someone inside. Wilfred made calls, quiet calls, to lawyers, to board members, to business journalists who owed him favors. The whispers started. Is Sterling mentally fit to lead? Can a CEO in a wheelchair really handle the pressure? Shouldn't we prioritize shareholder value over sentiment? The narrative was being shaped. And narratives, once established, were harder to change than steel. Archie brought Louisa to work on Saturday because the babysitter canceled, and taking her along was better than leaving her alone. She sat in the break room with her tablet and a box of circuit components, building something intricate and purposeful while her father checked coolant levels in the basement. That's where Alexandra found them. She'd come down the service elevator specifically to avoid the executive floor, where Wilfred's allies monitored her movements. She wore jeans and a sweater. The exoskeleton visible now because she didn't have to hide it here. The metal braces ran along her legs like elegant bones, servos whirring softly with each assisted step. Louisa looked up from her project and saw the exoskeleton with undisguised wonder. "That's so cool," she breathed. Alexandra laughed, surprised by the honesty. "It's experimental," she said. "Still has bugs. All good tech has bugs," Louisa replied with the confidence of someone who'd been debugging circuits since she was 5. "That's how you make it better." Archie emerged from the mechanical room, saw Alexandra, and felt the world rearrange itself slightly. She was here. In his space, not as CEO but as the person who'd shared wildflowers and honesty across a restaurant table. "I wanted to return this," Alexandra said, holding out the handkerchief Archie had offered during a rain shower. "And to see where you work, where you fixed the pump that made you late." They talked. Not about corporate strategy or building systems, but about the accident. About the night 6 months ago, when Alexandra's memory cut to black. "I remember a black SUV," she said quietly. "Headlights too bright, the smell of gasoline, someone braking hard. Then nothing, until I woke up in the hospital." "Do you remember where you were going?" Archie asked. "The Harbor District. I had a late meeting with a potential acquisition target, a small robotics firm. But when I tried to follow up after I woke up, the company didn't exist anymore. Dissolved. Papers filed the week I was in surgery." Louisa, listening with the intensity children bring to adult conversations, asked the question that mattered. "Are you still scared? Of cars? Alexandra looked at the girl and saw something she'd forgotten how to access. Straightforward honesty without political calculation. "Yes," she said. "Every time I get in one, I'm terrified. But I still go." "That's bravery," Louisa said matter-of-factly, returning to her soldering. Archie walked Alexandra to the elevator. Before the doors closed, he made a promise that would bind them together. "If something's broken," he said, "I'll help you fix it, even if it means fixing the whole world." She believed him. That was the most dangerous part. She believed him. Finn Monroe came to Archie 3 days later with a manila folder and an expression that suggested he was about to pay his debt in full. "I shouldn't show you this," he said, sliding the folder across the break room table. "But I owe you. And something's wrong." Inside were security logs from the night of Alexandra's accident. Camera feeds from the Harbor District. Timestamps. Vehicle identification records. There was a 30-second gap in coverage. Perfectly timed. Perfectly executed. "IR jammer," Archie said immediately, recognizing the signature of infrared interference. "Blinds the cameras but doesn't shut them down. Looks like a glitch instead of sabotage." "That's what I thought," Finn agreed. "But look at this." He pulled up traffic camera footage from a block away. A black SUV, license plate obscured, appearing at 11:42 p.m. and disappearing at 11:44 p.m., right through the blind spot. Archie studied the images with the methodical focus he brought to electrical diagrams. "Someone who knew her schedule," he said slowly. "Someone who could time this perfectly. Someone inside. Someone on the board." Finn finished. They looked at each other with the understanding of people who'd just agreed to something dangerous. The next piece came from an unexpected source. Alexandra had asked Archie to inspect her exoskeleton because it had been behaving erratically, freezing at random moments. He brought it to his workshop in the basement, spread the components across his workbench, and started checking systems. The firmware had been modified. Not recently. This was old code, slipped in during manufacturing, designed to malfunction at programmed intervals. Just enough to make the user seem unreliable. Just enough to plant doubt. Archie photographed everything, documented the checksum mismatches, and brought his findings to Finn. Together, they went to Henry Blake, who liked numbers because numbers didn't lie even when people did. Henry reviewed the evidence with growing horror. "This matches a maintenance ticket," he said, pulling up old records. From right before the accident, someone accessed the exoskeleton software for routine calibration. The authorization came from an executive proxy account. "Whose account?" Archie asked. Henry's face went gray. "Mine. But I never authorized this." The conspiracy was taking shape. Someone had used Henry's credentials, modified the exoskeleton to create doubt about Alexandra's capabilities, and then orchestrated an accident to remove her from power entirely. When she survived, they'd switched to Plan B. Undermine her publicly. Force a vote. Take control. "We need more evidence," Finn said. "Something concrete. Something we can bring to the board without them dismissing it as speculation." Archie thought about timing. About systems. About how everything in a building left traces if you knew where to look. "The elevator," he said suddenly. "Alexandra was here late that night, working. She would have used the executive elevator. If someone tampered with her schedule, with her safety systems, they would have needed access to building automation. They pulled maintenance logs, found anomalies, accessed timestamps that didn't match any scheduled work. A proxy account different from Henry's that had run diagnostic scripts on the elevator control system the afternoon before the accident. The pieces were connecting. But they needed the why. They needed Wilfred. The shareholder meeting was scheduled for the third Thursday of the month, a quarterly ritual where investors asked pointed questions and executives provided carefully crafted answers. Alexandra had been preparing for weeks, knowing this would be her moment to prove she could still lead, still command respect, still drive the company forward. She wore red. Not the corporate navy or gray that executives used as camouflage, but a bold crimson dress with a V-neck that made no apologies. She'd practiced her presentation 100 times, perfecting every gesture, every word. The exoskeleton was hidden beneath her clothing, allowing her to stand at the podium, to meet their eyes at level ground. Her speech focused on the future. On the robotics assistance division that could change millions of lives. On technology as liberation, not limitation. She spoke about what Sterling Dynamics could be if it chose humanity over quarterly profits, innovation over safe returns. She was brilliant. She was compelling. She was winning. Then Wilfred played his video. It appeared on the presentation screen behind her, replacing her slides. Footage from the parking garage. Footage that had been edited, frame rates adjusted, angles selected to show weakness. Alexandra reaching for papers and dropping them. The wheelchair appearing to slip on a painted line, her hands shaking during transfer to the car. Every moment selected and amplified to suggest incompetence, fragility, inability to lead. The room fell silent. Investors shifted in their seats. Board members exchanged glances. The narrative Wilfred had been carefully constructing was crystallizing before them. "I apologize for the interruption," Wilfred said, standing with false regret. "But the board has a fiduciary duty to address concerns about leadership stability. These are unedited security recordings from the past month. They speak to questions of capability under pressure." Alexandra felt the room slipping away from her, felt the months of work, of physical therapy, of forcing herself to stand when every nerve screamed, all of it crumbling because someone had weaponized her disability against her. Then a voice rose from the technical staff section. Archie Coleman stood in his maintenance uniform, holding a tablet. "Those recordings aren't unedited," he said clearly. "The frame rate has been altered from 30 frames per second to 22. The timestamp metadata doesn't match the security system's native format. And if you check the original files from the building server, you'll find those moments look very different." Heads turned. Wilfred's expression hardened. "This is highly irregular. Who authorized this person to—" "I'm the senior facility operations technician," Archie interrupted. "I maintain the systems that generate these recordings. And I'm telling you, this video is manipulated." He tapped his tablet. "I can provide the original files. Same timestamps. No manipulation. The board deserves to see the truth." The chairman of the board, an older man named Porter, who'd survived 3 tech crashes and valued evidence over rhetoric, spoke carefully. "This is a serious accusation. Both ways. We'll need independent verification before proceeding." The meeting was suspended. Chaos rippled through the room. Alexandra caught Archie's eyes across the crowd and saw something that gave her strength. Not pity, not charity. Partnership. Someone standing beside her because it was right, not because she was helpless. Wilfred knew in that moment that Archie Coleman was the problem. The variable he hadn't accounted for. The wrench in his machinery. And wrenches could be removed if you applied enough force. That night, Finn and Archie went to the harbor district, following a thread that Finn had been carefully pulling. The black SUV in the traffic footage had fake plates, but the paint scrape pattern suggested a specific model and year. Cross-referencing that with vehicle rentals during that week narrowed it to 3 possibilities. 2 were accounted for. The third had been returned to a sketchy rental agency near the docks, the kind that asked few questions. The agency's owner, persuaded by Finn's law enforcement credentials and general air of barely contained violence, admitted the SUV had been returned with unexplained damage. Front quarter panel. Headlight. Exactly what you'd expect from forcing another vehicle off the road. He'd sold the SUV for parts rather than report it. But he'd kept the GPS unit because those were worth money. The GPS led them to a warehouse near Container Storage Yard 7. Abandoned. Perfect for storing evidence you didn't want found. They went at night with flashlights and the kind of determination that comes from knowing you're right but can't yet prove it. The warehouse smelled of salt and rust. Their lights cut through darkness, illuminating empty spaces that echoed with dripping water. Then they found the storage unit in the back, locked with a combination padlock, which Finn cut with bolt cutters that could have been regulation or could have been improvised. Inside, carefully preserved, they found everything. The IR jammer, paint chips, that would match Alexandra's Tesla. A box of firmware drives, labeled with Sterling Dynamics internal codes. Maintenance logs printed on company letterhead showing scheduled work that never appeared in official records. They were photographing everything when the overhead lights snapped on, blinding them. Two men emerged from the shadows, faces covered, carrying objects that didn't need to be identified to be understood as threats. These weren't opportunistic criminals. They moved with purpose, with instructions. Finn positioned himself between Archie and the threat. "Run," he said quietly. "Not leaving you," Archie replied, his mind already calculating angles, exits, resources. The warehouse electrical panel was 20 feet to his left. The fuse box. If he could kill the lights, he moved fast, surprising everyone, including Finn. Reached the panel, through the main breaker, plunged them all back into darkness. Then he used his flashlight strategically, pointing it low at puddles of standing water, creating reflections that disoriented rather than illuminated. Finn used the chaos to close distance. Military training took over. One attacker went down hard, the other hesitated. And in that hesitation, Archie threw his multi-tool at the warehouse's ancient fuse box, hitting it hard enough to shower sparks and create a genuine fire hazard. The sprinkler system activated. Water cascaded down. The remaining attacker slipped on wet concrete, crashed into a metal shelving unit, and stayed down. Finn was bleeding from a shallow shoulder cut but functional. They grabbed the evidence, the GPS unit, the jammer, the firmware drives, and left the attackers for the police that Alexandra, notified by Bridget, had already dispatched. Outside, rain mixing with sprinkler water, Archie and Finn looked at each other with the understanding of people who'd just crossed a line. This wasn't corporate politics anymore. This was criminal conspiracy. This was attempted murder. "We have what we need," Finn said. "Now we finish this." The next morning, Louisa asked her father why he had bruises on his arms. Archie, who'd raised her on honesty, told her a modified version of the truth, that he was helping someone prove they weren't lying, that sometimes the truth was buried and you had to dig carefully. That afternoon, while Archie was at work and Louisa was supposedly doing homework, she noticed Wilfred Langley in the building corridor. He was talking on his phone, voice low, repeating a phrase that caught her attention. "Profit over pity. That's always been my position." Louisa, who'd been raised to notice details, filed that phrase away. That night, while playing with a password-guessing game her father had built to teach her about security, she tried it on a work file she'd found on a USB drive that had fallen from her father's bag. Profit over pity. No capitals, no spaces. It worked. The files spilled across her screen. Meeting schedules, call logs, VIN numbers for vehicles. A spreadsheet titled Contingency Timeline, with dates that matched Alexandra's accident. Cross-references between board meetings and camera blind spots. Louisa, 7 years old and smarter than most adults, understood she'd found something important. She saved everything to a new folder, encrypted it with a password her dad had taught her, and left him a note on the kitchen table. "Dad, I think I found the answer. Password is Mars Rover. Love you. Don't be mad." Archie came home at 2 a.m., found the note, opened the files, and felt his blood turn cold. This wasn't circumstantial evidence. This was a blueprint, a plan to remove Alexandra Sterling permanently, restructure the company, and profit from the chaos. He called Finn. Finn called Alexandra. Alexandra called her lawyers. And they prepared for war. The emergency board session was called with 48 hours' notice. All board members required to attend. All executives present. The room felt like a courtroom waiting for a verdict, which in many ways it was. Wilfred arrived with his own attorney, a man whose hourly rate could fund a small school district. He was confident. He'd spent months building this narrative, positioning his pieces, controlling information. One maintenance worker with circumstantial evidence wasn't going to topple his carefully constructed empire. He was wrong. Alexandra presented first. She stood at the head of the table, supported by the exoskeleton that represented both her vulnerability and her strength, and laid out a timeline. The accident, the camera blackout, the modified firmware, the harassment campaign, the manipulated shareholder video. Each point supported by documents, by logs, by independent analysis. Wilfred's attorney objected. Correlation isn't causation. My client may have disagreed with leadership decisions, but disagreement isn't conspiracy. Then Archie presented the technical evidence. He walked the board through the timeline with the precision of someone explaining a wiring diagram. Camera blind spot at 11:42 p.m. IR jammer frequency that matched Harbor District blackout. Firmware modifications that matched the manufacturing schedule of Alexandra's exoskeleton. Elevator access logs using a proxy account. GPS data placing the black SUV at the accident scene. Every piece time-stamped. Every piece verified. Every piece pointing to a coordinated attempt to remove Alexandra Sterling from power. Finn provided the physical evidence from the warehouse. The devices, the paint chips, the maintenance logs that would match chemical signatures from Sterling Dynamics printers. Henry Blake, shaking but resolute, admitted he'd been pressured to sign off on audit bypasses, told they were routine cost-saving measures, realizing too late he'd been providing cover for sabotage. Finally, Bridget presented the document leak trail. How Alexandra's private schedule had been accessed from Wilfred's office network. How calendar modifications had ensured she'd be alone, vulnerable, on the night someone ran her off the road, and the files Louisa had unlocked copied to a secure drive, verified by digital forensics, showed intent, showed planning, showed a man who'd decided profit mattered more than human life. Wilfred's composure finally cracked. This is absurd. You're taking the word of a maintenance worker and a child over a board member with decades of service. I'm taking evidence over rhetoric, Alexandra interrupted. Her voice was steel, wrapped in ice. You tried to kill me because I wouldn't prioritize your vision of profit over humanity. You sabotaged my equipment. You orchestrated an accident. And when I survived, you tried to destroy my reputation instead. You didn't just betray me. You betrayed every person who believed this company stood for something more than quarterly returns. The vote was swift. 17-2 to remove Wilfred from the board and refer all evidence to criminal prosecutors. The two dissenting votes came from members whose portfolios were too entangled with Wilfred's to jump ship. They'd resign within the month. Porter, the chairman, looked at Wilfred with the kind of cold disgust usually reserved for particularly unpleasant insects. You forgot something, he said. Disability doesn't mean weak. It means surviving something that would have destroyed most people. Miss Sterling came back from an assassination attempt and still led this company forward. That's not weakness. That's the strongest damn thing I've seen in 40 years of business. Security escorted Wilfred out. He maintained his dignity until the elevator doors closed, and then, according to Finn's report, he crumpled. In the boardroom, Alexandra and Archie stood near the windows overlooking Seattle. The rain had cleared, leaving the city washed clean under late afternoon Sunday. You saved me, Alexandra said quietly. Not because I couldn't save myself, but because you were brave enough to help when it mattered. You saved yourself, Archie corrected. I just held the flashlight so you could see where you were working. That was when Louisa, who'd been waiting in the executive lounge, eating cookies that cost more than her weekly lunch budget, ran into the room and hugged her father's leg. Did we win? She asked. We found the truth, Archie told her. That's better than winning. 3 months later, Sterling Dynamics announced the ExoKid Scholarship Program. Full funding for children with mobility challenges to study engineering and robotics. The first recipient was a 7-year-old girl with remarkable aptitude for electrical systems, recommended by the CEO herself. Archie accepted a position as a senior safety consultant, part-time, with hours that let him be home when Louisa got off the school bus. Not because he needed charity, but because his skills had value, and Alexandra understood that expertise came from experience, not credentials. The Robotics Assistance Division stayed. Expanded, actually. The exoskeletons went into production, helping thousands of people stand who'd been told they never would again. On a cool evening in late spring, Alexandra took her first unsupported steps. 10 feet across the physical therapy room, with Archie holding a safety strap, and Louisa counting cadence like a drill sergeant. She made it to the parallel bars and stood there, tears streaming down her face, shaking with exhaustion and triumph. "I'm standing," she said, voice breaking. "I'm actually standing." "You were always standing," Archie replied. "We just built you better legs." Later, on the roof garden of Sterling Dynamics Tower, they watched the city light up as dusk settled. The wind carried the smell of salt water and coffee, the signature scents of Seattle. "You gave me the courage to stand," Alexandra said, her hand finding his. "Even when I was sitting down. You taught me to believe in tomorrow," Archie said. "Even when today was hard." They didn't kiss. Not yet. There was time for that. Instead, they stood together, one man who fixed broken things, one woman who'd refused to stay broken, one child who believed the world made sense if you just asked the right questions and watched the lights come on across the city. Behind them, the Sterling Dynamics Tower rose like a promise kept, a monument not to profit over pity, but to the radical idea that humanity and business weren't opposites. That strength came in many forms, that falling down didn't matter nearly as much as choosing to stand back up, and that sometimes, the people who laughed at the beginning became silent, not from fear, but from shame at what they'd almost dismissed as impossible. The lights of the city burned steady. Truth always did. Once you turned it on,